My name is Dan Richter, and today I'll be interviewing Joseph Alfred Nicolli. He came to our writers group at the Colville Library in Centennial, Colorado on the first week of April or so. It was a good chilly night, the kind of night that would set the mood for talking about his war manuscript. So Joe, it's been 68 years since you've been discharged from the Army. What was the reason for not telling your story before now?
Well, as you know, most GIs don't say much about their combat experience. For years, I never said anything to my family or my son or grandkids, but in the last few years or last few months, they've been asking me to write down something about my war experience. So I decided I should start doing that. I'll be 90 years old in July, and I think they ought to know exactly what happened when I was in combat. So this is what made me do it.
Well, I think those are good reasons. Now, if I remember from your manuscript right, you were drafted in 1943?
Yes, sir.
How old were you then?
I was about 19 years old.
All right, and that would have put you into World War II. Did you know at the time you would be going to France, to Normandy?
No, I didn't. When we got drafted, when you're in basic training, they don't tell you where you're headed for. They just give you the training.
Mm-hmm.
And the last minute after you receive your training and get back in after your furlough, you're back in the Army. They don't tell you until you're almost where you're going.
Mm-hmm. Kind of when you need to know, they'll tell you.
They'll tell you when
Yeah.
they feel like it's time to tell you.
Yeah, that would be the Army.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
All right. Well, where was home for you before you were drafted? What was that like?
Home was here in Denver. All my ancestors and my family were all truck garden farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was brought up on a truck garden, and that's about what I was doing outside of school. I'd be on the farm.
Mm-hmm. So who was living in the house with you and your family? Do you have brothers and sisters?
I had a brother and a sister, and I was the youngest one of the three of us. And my brother and sister were married, and I was just home alone with my mother.
So you were pretty much left there to do the work on the farm.
I was.
Mhm.
I did.
And your family served, your extended family has served in the service, haven't
That's
they?
exactly right. My dad was in World War I, and I was 18 months old when he died. He got gassed in France from the Germans, and he died at Fitzsimmons when I was 18 months old. So I never knew
sorry
my
to hear
dad.
about that. But I believe your children served as well, haven't they?
Yes, my son was in Vietnam War. He never went overseas, but he was in the medics here in the United States. My grandson was in the Navy for 4 years, and then after 4 years he went to college and finished in 3 years, and went in. He got accepted as a Navy pilot, and he's an F-18 pilot right now.
All right. Well, I want to address you properly. What was your rank when you were discharged in 1946?
I was a T5. I was a corporal technician.
All right. So that'd be Tech Corporal Nicolli or Mr. Nicolli, or what shall I call you?
Well, the Army, they called you corporal, but in civilian, they'll just call you, I'd rather have you call me Joe.
Very well. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate your family service.
Thank you.
All right. Well, in the manuscript that you brought to the writer's circle, that you wrote about your warriors, you talked about how young you were, and we'd like to know what your feelings were about the war before you went off.
You know, you're a young person when you called in service. When you're young, you really don't think too much about what's going to happen to you. When you get older, you think more about it, but when you're young, you really don't pay much attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were drafted right before Christmas. Did this timing make you feel, was it harder for you to leave home at that time?
It was, because I never was away from home before that.
Mm-hmm.
I was born and raised in Denver. I didn't do much traveling when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
So this was all new experience for me.
All right. Well, I remembered you saying in your manuscript that you took the train to your basic training. What was that trip like, and did you know anybody else on the train, or was it a lonely trip?
Okay, there was 18 of us. We were put on a troop train from Inglewood, and there was 18 of us, and we was in that train, on that train for 5 days and 5 nights. I did meet one guy that knew my sister. He went to school with my sister.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Tony Spanarilla. And Tony and I did our basic training together. We came home on furloughs together, and we went back on a troop train to New York and New Jersey, and we stayed on that. We both went to overseas together in the same boat.
So you went to basic together, and you knew each other on the train there.
That's right.
So you had some company.
Yeah.
And once you got to basic, you had still somebody that you knew, and then you were able to go on furlough after basic before you went to Europe.
That's correct.
Oh, that's good. That's good. What were your first impressions of basic training, and where did they send you for basic?
Well, we had no idea where we were going. We ended up at Camp Blanding, Florida. It's a huge camp, and once we got there, we didn't have any cell phones in those days, so we couldn't call our folks back home and tell them where we were going or where we were at. But when we got there, the captain of our outfit led us into the library. He sat us down into some chairs and desks, and there was pencil and paper there. He said, I want you to write home to your folks and tell them where you're at. You're at Camp Blanding, and you'll be here for 17 weeks basic training, that you're doing fine and you're well. So that's what we did.
All right. Well, did that make you feel more assured that you were in a safe place, or did it make you feel even more unsure about things that they were having you write home right now?
It made us feel more comfortable. He was a kind captain. He was sympathetic.
All right. That's a good thing.
He was a good
Yeah.
guy.
That's good. You don't often meet those kind of people, and they
No,
stick
you
in your
don't.
memory, don't they?
I remember him distinctly. He was a swell guy.
Mhm. Well, I would imagine that Denver in the early 40s would have been a pretty rural place. Would that be accurate?
That's exactly right.
Well, I think Camp Landing was considered to be the 4th largest city in the United States at the time. How was that for an old farm boy?
I wasn't aware of that until then, but I knew after I got there, it was a big camp. It was huge.
What was it like to be around all of those guys, all those strangers?
It was different. I never was around many people before that. I was sort of shy and sort of uncomfortable sometimes, but it didn't take long to mingle in with them.
Well, I'm not going to ask you about the routines where they made you work out or march or carry all that gear and stuff. I'm going to ask you about something more pleasant. Not quite as pleasant as getting off on furlough, but what were the meals like? What was that time when you weren't working out like?
The meals at Camp Landing were very good. The first week we were there, we were served family style. And people I was with, a lot of them were from Kentucky. And some of those guys were pretty rough individuals. I guess some of them never wore shoes before, but when the meals were passed around, these guys would take most of the food. By the time it got to some of these people that were kind of bashful like me, there was no food left.
Oh my
And our
gosh.
captain was watching that. So he said, that's enough of this. So the next week, we were served cafeteria style.
Oh man. Well, did you make any meaningful friends in basic training, or did that come later?
No, I did. I met a lot of friends there, but I lost track of them after we were divided into, after we left for combat, for furlough, I never seen any of them anymore. But some of those guys from Kentucky made good infantry, good combat people. They were really out there fighting. I take my hat off to them guys.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it's good to know somebody's got your back out there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So when you were explaining your job to me about the job you got in the Army, did you have any choice of the company you were going to go to or the type of work you would do?
No, you didn't have any choice. I made one mistake. When I filled out my questionnaire, they ask you, the Army asks you, or the government asks you, what are your hobbies? And my hobbies was fishing and hunting. I did a lot of hunting with my brother-in-law, and I was getting pretty good at it. So when I got drafted, they probably said, this guy likes to hunt, we'll keep letting him hunt. So that's why I probably ended up in the infantry.
Mm-hmm. Well, didn't you get a sharpshooter badge
I
as
did,
well?
during the rifle range, I had the second highest score in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And the captain pinned the medal on me personally.
Well, that's
So
pretty
wonder they
impressive.
didn't make a sniper out of me,
Yeah.
but I'm glad they did.
I'm glad they didn't as well. Glad they didn't as well. So how did you get into heavy weapons?
I had no choice, that's where I ended up in. Heavy weapons, there was two types of weapons companies. One is a light company, and one's a heavy weapons. The light company, you have machine guns, but they're air cooled. And they have a 60mm motor, which is much smaller than what we had. We had 81mm mortars. They were about a 4-inch diameter barrel, about 3 or 4 feet long, and it had a very heavy plate and a tripod. And the machine gun was they all were 30 caliber machine guns, but ours was water cooled.
Mm-hmm.
It had a water cool jacket on where you kept it full of water,
Mm-hmm.
keep the barrel cool. So that was the difference, and I had no choice. I was put in heavy weapons, that was it.
And they trained you on that equipment.
We trained on that equipment.
Well, before you left England for France, did you guys see the V2 rockets, or were they flying then? Or?
We could see V2s at night
Mm-hmm.
from coming over from Germany. And you couldn't hear them, but you could see it. They would move very slow and sort of flickering. And they did a lot of damage in England.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember something about Bed Check Charlie in your manuscript. Is that the V2s, or is that something else?
No, that Bed Check Charlie was an airplane scouting at night. At 10 o'clock, you could set your clock. He'd be there at 10 o'clock every night, straight from the hedgerows. And everyone called him Bed Check Charlie.
Yeah, and every night at 10 o'clock.
Every night at 10 o'clock, I don't care where you were at.
And he was shooting at you guys. Were you guys ever shooting back at him?
Well, when we were in replacement pool in Normandy, Bed Check Charlie came over. That was the first night we were there.
Mm-hmm.
We were along the hedgerows and foxwoods. And this plane started coming over, and he started firing. And we could hear the bullets hitting the weeds next to us.
Mm-hmm.
And some guy took a shot at him with his M1, and that was a mistake.
How so?
Well, he came around and he dropped flares, and he took pictures of that whole area. So the next night at 10 o'clock, he came back, and he bombed, there was a first aid tent there.
Oh, no.
And he bombed that first aid tent and killed about 35 GIs.
Mm.
And he strafed the same area where we were at. We could still hear the bullets. If he would have been over 10 feet or 5 feet, he would have killed a lot of guys.
Yeah.
But he was over too far to the left.
Jeez. So before you get in the Higgins boats, the guys are all on the beach and they're showing that they're not atheists. Did anybody ever just completely not deal with the stress, or how were they dealing with that journey they were about to take?
No one said a word. We just did what we was told. We all got in that Higgins boat. And I'd say there'd be about 40 or 50 guys on each boat.
Mm-hmm.
And the walls of that boat were pretty high. You couldn't see the side of the water. The first time we could see the water was when the front end of that Higgins boat dropped you off the
Mhm.
beach.
If I put the pieces together now, you were recognized as a sharpshooter. Was that on an M1?
It was an M1.
That's a Grand rifle?
Yeah, that was an M1 rifle. It hold 8 rounds.
All right. And
Semi-automatic.
then you were certified on the machine gun. You had to be good enough for them to feel comfortable to have you as a replacement gunner.
That's right. But I was a machine gun replacement, but that was my MO,
Mm-hmm.
job description.
So you're now ready, you've got your reassignment, you're ready to go to combat, and you don't have an M1, and you don't have a machine gun yet. What are you carrying, and was it adequate?
I was still carrying my .45, and I was hoping that I would end up meeting the people I was supposed to replace, but that never happened. We were disorganized, and I guess I was lost in the shuffle. And the only thing, like I said, I had was my .45. I didn't use it to go out trying to find somebody to kill. that weapon was for me to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
If I would have met up with a German face to face, he would have either probably killed me first, or I might have shot him first. That's hard to say, but what
Yeah.
happened.
Well,
I never ended up with a machine gun in combat.
I always thought the Army was one of those places where you were guaranteed leadership. Sounds like there was a lack of leadership in the battle.
There was not too much leadership there. Everybody seemed to be confused. I guess the reason for that is that some of the leaders didn't last very long.
Hmm.
And we just never seemed to know who was leading what.
Well, maybe you could tell us more about the casualties and about what you saw, your experiences in combat.
All right, the first day in combat, we were going up a hill. There was quite a few of us lined up across this field. And we started to walk up this hill, and the Germans started opening up fire on us. And the fellow next to me, I didn't know him, but I knew he got shot. He hollered and said he was shot. So I started hollering, I looked over and I started hollering for medics. And after I started hollering for medics, there was more guys hollering for medics.
Mm-hmm.
More guys were getting shot. It was a little while before the medics got to this poor guy next to me. I stayed with him as long as I could. And after the medics got there, I had to leave him, and I kept going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you guys were either pinned down by a sniper or by an ambush of infantry.
It was an ambush of infantry. It was more than a sniper.
Okay.
That's the first day we got rid of our backpacks. With all that weight, we couldn't carry all that backpack. Most of us had hand grenades in our front pockets. We had our belts loaded with bullets, ammunition, and most of us had a trench shovel on our belt, a full canteen of water, and my .45. So everything I had on my backpack, that was the only thing I had that I owned, was laying on the field
Mm-hmm.
with the rest of the other people's backpacks.
Well, did you get to see the medics work their magic that day?
That day I didn't know, I seen the medics coming to give this first aid on this one guy, but
Well, they kind of had a bad reputation in basic, didn't they?
they did. When we were in basic training, they called them pill rollers. But in combat, they were your best friend.
How bad?
They gave their lives for us, and we respected them. We took our hats off to them guys.
So they were heroes too.
Every one of them were heroes.
Excellent.
Yeah, they saved a lot of lives.
Yeah. Was there any particular incident that you could think about that might stand out in your mind about a medic?
Not really. A couple times there was wounded people, and then one of them asked me to help them carry the wounded out. And I told him I would. I said, but I have my pistol on me. I don't think I better do that. This one medic said, no, he said, we have red crosses on our helmets and they're still shooting at us. So keep that pistol with you and help us. So that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I, excuse me. And whenever you got wounded, everybody had their own first aid kit. If you got wounded, the medics would not use their first aid kit. They would use your first aid kit that was on you to bandage you up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they did.
Yeah. Were you able to carry enough gear in that first aid kit to make a difference?
It seemed to be sufficient. Yeah.
All right.
It had a lot of Band-Aids and gauze and disinfectant.
Right. Well, you're either gonna think of it as a comfort you're carrying or a waste of stuff you're having to carry.
That was one thing we didn't get rid of.
Yeah. So what did you get rid of that you missed the most?
I had all my shaving gear. I had my toothbrush, my razor, toothpaste, toothbrush, clean clothes. I had clean socks, clean underwear. So when I dumped that backpack off, I didn't have no clean clothes left to use.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in combat around 30 days. I never had a clean change of clothes as long as I was there.
Mm-hmm.
When I first got to the general hospital after combat, I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize myself. I had that helmet on all this time, and the helmet liner put a crease in my hair. I had a thick head of hair, and it put a big crease in my hair, and I hadn't shaved or washed up for 30 days. I didn't hardly recognize myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, 30 days seems like an awful time to,
It seemed like eternity.
yeah.
Some of those guys didn't last 10 minutes. And I know God was with me because
Mhm.
I knew that I wouldn't last very long.
All right. Well, you're standing kind of dry. Would you care to have a drink of
I'd
water?
like to.
I'm going to set up the next question then while you're refreshing yourself.
Okay.
I remember you telling me a couple of stories about times when you had a face-to-face with the enemy or with a lot of wounded or the dead. You want to share any of those stories?
One day I walked around the corner of this hedgerow. It seemed like I was the only guy in combat. There was guys way behind me. It seemed like I was the only guy there. I came around the corner, and there I ran into two soldiers. One was a German soldier, one of them was an American soldier, and both of their legs were blown off to their waist. That put me in such a terrible feeling. I never have gotten over that. I still think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then another time, we were crossing this fence. Most of these homes in France, these farmers, all their fences were hedgerows, but around their home property, there would be a barbed wire fence. My buddy and I were both crossing this barbed wire fence at the same time. He was about 10 or 20 feet away from me. We both stepped over that wire, and he stepped on the landmine and blew him up.
Mm-hmm.
I think before he hit the ground, he must have been dead. So I didn't even bother to help him, because I knew there was no hope for him. So I walked alone into this farmyard. And when I got into this farmyard, I seen a German SS trooper laying on his back. He wasn't over 20 or 22 years old. His helmet was off. He was a blonde-headed guy. His eyes were half open. He was bleeding through his mouth. And he was just laying there. I don't think he was completely dead. I could have taken that Luger. He had his Luger on him. He was well-dressed, big black riding boots. He must have been an officer. And I just kept going, and I know when I went through that farmyard, I knew there was more German soldiers waiting to kill somebody, but not a shot was fired at me. I went through there.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty soon the rest of the guys caught up with me.
Sounds pretty horrific.
Yeah.
How do you ever get those images out of your mind?
I never did. After 70 years, I still think about it.
Would that be any part of the reason why you haven't shared these stories?
Mostly. I wanted to not forget. I didn't want to talk about it. I tried to forget about it. When I got home, my brother and my family, none of them ever asked me about combat. So I didn't offer anything to tell them. I just kept quiet. It seemed like most of the guys never, even combat people never said much about combat. Just didn't say anything about it.
Well, besides the GI casualties and the German casualties, you must have seen a lot of destruction and a lot of wasted lives, even in the civilian or being in the farm. You must have seen stuff like that would have been terrible.
I've seen a lot of destruction. I've seen a lot of German tanks wiped out. But I have to say I've seen more American tanks wiped out than German tanks. Those German tanks were well built.
Mm-hmm.
Those were those German
Panzers?
Panther tanks.
Oh, Panthers.
Panther
Okay.
tanks. Those are really well built. The shell of that was rigid. Every time our shell would hit it, that would bounce off mostly. If you got a lucky shot, you could hit the treads on that tank and wipe it out. But our tanks were a lot smaller. Their guns were a lot bigger at first. They had 88 mounted on their tanks. They had 88 artillery. They had 88 for everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good weapon to use for them. Our guns on our tanks were, I think, 75 millimeters at first.
Mm-hmm.
But after combat, they changed that. They changed our tanks to 90 millimeters,
Mm-hmm.
which did a better job of wiping those other tanks out.
All right. And all of this battle, the 30-day battle, was it just constant danger, or did you have any break in the night or the day? Was there any difference between night and day?
There was a little bit of peace at night. We didn't do any fighting at night. Well, I have to tell you, this one night, it was starting to get dark, and we was in this field, and one of the sergeants, I believe he was a sergeant, told us to dig in for the night. So it was getting dark, and I took my trench shovel, started to dig my foxhole, and I hit a piece of metal. And I didn't pay much attention to it, I just threw it aside. And I dug my foxhole. The next morning I got up, I looked at that piece of metal, it was a crushed German helmet. And that trench that I dug must have been exactly where a German must have died and got killed.
Mm. That's terrible. Well, who were the leaders of who were the tank commanders for the two sides? Was Rommel on the German side?
Rommel was on the German side, and Patton was on our side. He was in charge of the 3rd Armored Division.
Mm-hmm.
Rommel, at the time of the invasion, Germans didn't know we were going to invade Normandy, and that's where Rommel was headquartered. But at the time of the invasion, a day or two before the invasion, Rommel's wife had a birthday, and he decided he wanted to go back to Berlin to visit his wife on her birthday. Well, when he got there, it was exactly the time the invasion started. And the Germans didn't have their tanks there. They weren't prepared for landing there. Miles away, Patton had cardboard tanks set up to make decoys, making the Germans think that we were going to invade from that area. But they were just cardboard tanks. Where we landed, the Germans didn't know we were going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And the bad thing about Rommel, or the good thing for us, Hitler didn't like what Rommel did by leaving his post at that crucial time. So Hitler gave him two choices. He could either get shot, and he would not get a military burial, or he could take a pill and die, and we would give him a memorial, a military burial. So he took the pill, and that's how he died.
Oh my gosh.
But he was a good leader for Germany. I think Hitler made a big mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
it
think
sounds
he
like
knew
he
that.
lost a good friend in
He
that
did.
life.
He
That
did.
would have helped him through the end of it.
Hitler did us a favor.
Yeah.
But he wasn't doing himself any
No,
favors.
I don't think so. Well, when you were in battle, did you build any close relationships with people?
I never did. During battle, I never really knew anybody personally.
Mm-hmm. Who did you confide in when things got to be too heavy to bear?
Myself. Sometimes I just could not believe I was there. I didn't think I would last more than a day. I'll have to tell you, this one time there was 9 of us. One of them was our first lieutenant. We were on a ridge, and we were surrounded by Germans, and we were there 2-3 days. Every time there was a little stream down below where we would go down to fill up our canteens full of water. But every time the GI would go down there, the German snipers would start shooting at us. So our lieutenant told us not to go down there anymore. We were up there 2-3 days, and finally in the morning we were going to leave. We knew we were free to leave. We left, but there was only 8 of us left. Our lieutenant was killed in his foxhole. An 88 shell hit him direct.
Mm.
But there was only 8 of us left to leave.
That's terrible. That's terrible. So, how often in that 30 days that you were in combat did you get a letter from home, somebody to even think about sharing all this tragedy with?
Dan, we never did get any letter in combat. I never had a letter as long as I was in combat.
Mm.
I didn't get any letters until after I got out of the hospital from being shook up. I'll have to tell you about that too.
Well, what happened there? Did that take you out of battle?
The last day I was in battle, I was in a foxhole. It was really early in the morning. I was laying in my foxhole, and all of a sudden an 88 shell landed right next to me on the left side of my foxhole. covered me up with dirt, and all I could see is a big blue and white flash. All I remember is being in an first aid tent. And after that, they took me in an ambulance to a field hospital. I was in that field hospital for 10 days. And when I was in that field hospital, I finally wrote to my mother and told her I was in the hospital, and I told her I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And after 10 days, after being in the hospital 10 days, I was sent to a quartermaster outfit. And we were in that quartermaster outfit for 90 days. I was right off the beach in Normandy. And right off that beach, they were starting to build a cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
It was called the 29th Infantry Cemetery. And while we were there at that quartermaster outfit, one day we decided to walk across the street to the cemetery and watch them bury the GIs. When we got there, they were putting GIs in mattress covers, and they were lowering them down with a rope into the hole. And after they lowered them in the grave, they would throw a sack of lime on top of them, and then they would bury them with dirt. That bothered us, and we never went back to see that anymore.
That's too hard to think about when
It
you're
is.
in the situation you were in.
It was horrible.
Well, you had faced other 88s going off near you. You must have been injured.
I wasn't injured. I didn't get a Purple Heart. I didn't get any open wounds. But I learned later in life that I had a ruptured eardrum
Mm-hmm.
after taking a physical after in civilian. I started driving a school bus at Cherry Creek Schools. And that doctor told me, do you know you had a ruptured eardrum?
Did you still have symptoms? What were your symptoms of the ruptured eardrum, of the hearing loss?
I had a lot of ringing in my ear, in my head, but I tried to overcome that. I didn't think I had a ruptured eardrum, but they might have looked at that and saw it, but they didn't tell me that.
Mm-hmm.
But I had ringing in my ears for a while, but I finally overcome that.
Did you fully recover?
I did.
All right.
I have a little trouble hearing from that left side.
Mm-hmm.
My wife keeps shouting at me, but I'm too tight to have hearing aids.
Oh, yeah.
They're
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah. Well, so you got into the MPs and you got relocated distance away from the battlefield. How did you like your new job as an MP?
I loved my new job. The first city we were sent to, we drove to a little town called Nogent-la-Seine. And we weren't there very long, Dan, about a week or two. It was close to Christmas, and this was on a Christmas Eve. While we were there, we were put up in chateaus, we call it a chateau. It was a big apartment house, and we were the only ones in there. And right next door was a French family. A couple of my buddies and I got to know real well in the few days we were there. Well, they invited us over for a Christmas Eve dinner. So we got there that Christmas Eve, and it was dark, and we no more had sat down, and one of the guys from the chateau came running over, and they said, we got to leave right now. The Germans are breaking through the front lines in Belgium, and we got to head back for Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed these poor French people had homemade pies sitting there. They started crying, and we did too. That was the last time we seen them.
Mm-hmm.
And we threw all of our stuff in our truck and headed for Belgium.
How far away was the battlefield for where they were coming in?
When we got to the battle area, before we got there, we drove all night long. And I remember we stopped at a little town where we rendezvoused with a tanker to gas up. I was gassing up our truck, and all the other guys got off for a restroom. And it must have been around 10 o'clock, because here comes Big Check Charlie. And he started strafing the street ahead of us. And I said to myself, well, I guess he'll come back up and get this street and we'll be gone. But luckily, and thank God, he never came back. He just kept going.
Well, that is.
So after that, after I gassed up, I whistled at everybody and told them we gotta get going.
Mhm.
So we headed back for the bulge. We got pretty close to the bulge, and that was as far as we would go. We didn't get where we could hear some of our cannons fire, but
Mhm.
that's as close as we got.
All right.
Then we were there to direct traffic towards the front, and that's what we did for a while.
Mhm. How long's a while?
We was there about a week.
All right. And where did you go after that?
After that, we were, I can't remember, we were sent back to England.
Mhm.
We were replaced in another outfit, the EMPs. They took our place in France, and we went to England, a town called Cardiff. And my company was there, but our little detachment of 18 guys drove to a little town in Swansea, in Wales, called Swansea, South Wales.
Mhm.
And we were there during the time the armistice was signed in Germany. And that was called, you asked me that the other day, what was that called? And I couldn't remember, but I remember that was called VE Day.
Mhm.
VJ Day was a victory in Japan,
Yep.
and the victory in Europe was called VE Day.
All right. How long were you in Wales?
I was in Wales for about, well, I was there the 15th of May. I know we were there during the armistice of Germany. And I was there until around February.
Mhm.
That's when we went to Southampton to board a boat to come back home.
Mhm. Well, before we get home, I want to know how you managed to handle the job at the POW camp. I would like to hear more about
Okay,
that.
I forgot to tell you that. When I was in the MPs, we were sent to a town called Gloucester. And in Gloucester, there was a big army camp called G25. That was an ordnance depot. And across the street from this depot was a big German POW camp.
Now, were you and the other 18 guys in your unit together?
It was 18 of us guys were all together. We were across the street from the stockade. We were in charge of those 1,800 prisoners. And I was the truck driver for the German prisoners, for hauling their supplies.
Mhm.
And 2 or 3 times a week, I would bring in a full load of groceries and food and supplies. But they had their own mess hall in that German camp.
Mhm.
Those guys were well taken care of. Now and then, when we were in our base and across the street from our camp, we would go to the movies, and we'd come back at night. We'd go back into the German POW camp and go into their kitchen.
Mhm.
And those German prisoners would have a 5-gallon bucket of potatoes peeled, and coffee on the stove perking. And they would fix fried potatoes, and they'd have homemade bread.
Mm.
Boy, they made good bread, just like my mother-in-law did. She was German. And they had homemade bread and fried potatoes and coffee for us.
All right.
And we would talk to those guys, and some of them said they didn't want to be in that army any worse than we did.
Yeah.
And some of them were pretty friendly.
Well, I've heard that nobody wanted to be in the war.
Nobody wanted to be, nobody wants to go and get killed.
Yeah. Well, were any of the other soldiers, the GIs, did they have the relationship that you had with the prisoners of war? Or?
They did. Those 18 had the same relationship as I did.
Well, that sounded like a good way to end the war.
Yeah, it
So
was.
is that where you finished out your duty?
I finished out my duty there.
All right.
And then we went to Southampton, is where we boarded the ship. I remember I had a bad cold. I was really sick, and I knew if I went on medical call that morning, that they would not let me leave to get on that ship. So I didn't go to first aid. I stayed in there, and we left with a bad cold.
So you didn't want to complain about a
I
cold?
wasn't complaining. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get home. That was
Yeah.
the first thing I wanted to do.
Well, it sounded like the trip over there was terrible. How was the trip home?
It was pretty bad. I was seasick again for 15 days. We was on a Liberty ship called the USS George Washington. And we were on that 15 days, and all the 15 days I was sick.
Mm-hmm.
Until I got to New York Harbor, and I got off that ship I was okay.
Yeah. Well, when you finally got on the train to come back to Denver, tell me about that. What was that like coming home to Denver?
Okay, let me tell you a little bit before we got on the train. When we got to Camp Shanks and went to Camp Kilmer,
This is in New York?
and this is in New Jersey.
Okay.
And well, when we got, sorry, let me backtrack. When we got to New York, Camp Shanks, we went to the mess hall and they had beautiful tables set up for us with white tablecloths,
Oh, how
which we hadn't
nice.
seen for a while. They had beautiful plates of silverware, and they had T-bone steaks for us and big oranges. Well, half of us couldn't eat much because our stomachs were shrunk. We couldn't eat too much of that steak. But then the next day, we were sent to Camp Kilmer. That's where we got our records, and we were put on a train. And that was the happiest day of my life.
Yeah.
I never imagined me being on a train again heading for home.
I bet. Was it all troops on the train
It
or
was
in your car?
full of combat troops,
And they were all coming home?
all coming home to Denver. I didn't know any of them.
Wow.
Even my buddy Tony Spanarello, I never seen him anymore after France.
Well, you told me before, when you're in battle, you may not have known anybody personally, but everybody was your buddy.
Everybody was your buddy.
Yeah. Well, how about on the trip home? Was everybody celebrating
Everybody was
your
happy.
buddy too?
One guy was on playing the guitar, and we were all singing, "She'll be coming around the corner when she comes." That's an old song then. I don't know if it is now, but we were all happy. All I was doing was counting the telephone poles
Mhm.
going by on that train ride.
Well, when you'd been home for a while, I know you got called up from the reserves, because you stayed in the reserves in some capacity, and they called you up to go to Korea. Were you supposed to resume your duties as an MP, or what job did they have in mind for you?
Well, when I got discharged, they told us, if we ever have another war, if you stay in the reserves, you can keep your same rank, you can get back into the MPs, do what you were doing before.
Mhm.
So they made it sound pretty good, so I decided, yeah, I'll stay in the reserves. So I stayed in the reserves, but after I got home, I did not attend any of the meetings. So they put me in the inactive reserve.
Hmm.
So after I was home for a while and didn't attend any meetings, in 1950 the war broke out in Korea, and President Truman needed troops right away. They were killing GIs and Korean people in Korea pretty fast. So he decided to call all the inactive reserves. And I was in the inactive reserves, and I was called back into the military. But when I got called in, they did not put me in the MPs. I think the government did not treat us right. They put me back into the infantry. They didn't tell me you were going into the MPs. So when we got on that troop train, I didn't have any idea where I was going.
Mhm. So they had you going to someplace to report for duty. You didn't know where you were going.
We didn't know where we were going. We ended up in Fort Lewis, Washington. And while we were there, they threw a rifle at me. They said, "You're in the infantry." And I told the sergeant, I said, "I'm not in the infantry, I'm in the MPs." He said, "They're not killing MPs in there up in Korea, they're killing infantrymen." Excuse me. I told him, "Well, if you check my record says no more combat for me." I said, "And then I'm going to kill this guy because I'm not going back into the infantry."
Mhm.
So after a long confrontation with him, I ended up in the hospital at Madigan Hospital at Fort Lewis. I was there 6 months before they decided to let me go home.
Was that for a medical eval to see if you were fit for combat?
I
or-
guess, I don't know if it took them that long to find my records or evaluate me or anything. By that time, the war was ending up in Korea, so I got discharged, I went home.
Well, that was
I got
good
an honorable
timing.
discharge again.
Yeah, that was good timing.
It
Now,
was.
I guess you've been home a while, and a long-lost war buddy got in touch with you?
Yes, his name was Chet Cohen. I met him in the MPs. And he lived in New Jersey, he still does. And he and I do communicate still, and I hope to see him at my birthday on the 90th. And, but he didn't tell me then, but he was a German prisoner. He and his buddy both got shot up, and I learned later that he was shot in the neck twice. And the Germans bandaged him up, and then they put a blindfold over him, and he told his buddy, well, I guess they're gonna shoot us now. So they blindfolded him. Pretty soon he realized they were getting having a prisoner exchange. German prisoners for American prisoners. And he was exchanged that way. That's how he got out of it alive.
Well, I'm kind of puzzled. You guys served together in the MPs when you were guarding the prisoners, and you must have had time to talk and build a relationship that would last this long. Didn't you guys share stories about this stuff before?
We never shared our stories, believe it or not, we never did. We just talked about present day stuff, and I don't know what else to tell you. That's what we did.
I can't imagine anybody holding back a story about being a POW and getting exchanged for another prisoner.
He was a pretty good guy, you know. He told me then, he didn't tell me, he told me after I talked to him on the phone that he was in the CID, in the infantry. They had Secret Service people there too, and that's what he was doing. He's pretty sharp.
Well, I thought about how it might have been his training to be tight-lipped. But I would think that to get to know somebody and to call them a friend, that you want to know about their values and their background.
That's exactly, but we didn't talk about it. I guess maybe because the Army had taught us when we got captured, just give them your name, rank, and serial number, and no other information. But we didn't talk about war.
Well, was there anything that you could think of that would be a reason why you felt like you could trust him?
Well, I knew I could trust him. We were really friendly. You could tell.
So you guys were good matches?
We were good matches. He was my type of personality. And I hope you get to see him and meet him.
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure to.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Was he doing all right?
He's doing fine.
Good.
And believe it or not, he said he's still working for the government.
Oh, really?
He's almost my age, I think.
Yeah.
And he said, Joe, I'm still working.
Well, talent never goes away, I don't think.
No.
Yeah. So when was it that he reconnected with you?
It was later in life. I worked at Samsonite making luggage, and he called me one day and he wanted, I talked to him before this one time, but this one time he called me. He said, Joe, he said, we're coming to Denver, we'd like to pick up some luggage. Can you give us a good deal on luggage? I said, absolutely, I could. I said, you tell me what kind of luggage you want, and I'll have it ready for you. So he came to Denver, and that's when I met him again. And we did do a little talking then.
And this is when you were working for Samsonite?
I was working for Samsonite Corporation.
Well, tell us about your career with Samsonite. That'd be the job you got when you got back.
That was a job I took when I got back. My brother worked at Samsonite, and he got me on at Samsonite. And the first job I had there was on loading lumber off of a boxcar. I'd lasted there about 3 or 4 days. They had an opening inside to sew binding on the luggage. So I got that job, and it took a little while of training. It was a tedious job doing that job, but I learned it well. And after a while, I decided I'd like to get a better job in that, so I went to the Opportunity School in Denver, and I went there for 4 years. I studied math and comptometry at that time, and I was put in the, after sewing, I was put into quality control. And I stayed in quality control for quite a while. And
some number of years?
Oh, about 4 or 5 years.
All right.
But after that, I was called into the office to be to work in inventory control, and I was in that for a long time. That's the job I really liked. But after we moved to our new factory in Denver, I was a scheduler, and the quality control guy came over there and he said, Joe, he said, I'd like for you to be working for me as a quality control engineer. I told him, I said, Bill, you got all kinds of control engineers running around here. Why don't you get one of those guys? I said, I don't know anything about engineering or quality control like that. He said, Joe, I'd like to have you, we'll train you. He said, I don't want anybody else but you. So after a couple of weeks, I decided I would try it. So after getting into quality control engineering, I stayed in that for about 10 years. But that was not my bag. I loved scheduling. And I got a new boss when I was in quality control engineering. It was a female. She was about 40 years old. She took a liking to me. She really liked me. And I said, Charlotte, I said, I don't like being in quality control. I said, I'd like to get back into production control. She said, you mean that, Joe? She said, I'll talk to Hesse, Dave Hesse. I said, well, I knew Dave. I broke him in when he came to Denver. I'll talk to him. So she talked to him. She said, she came back to me and said, Joe, he said he'll take you now. So I had left and was back in the production control.
And was that a leadership job?
More or less. I was on my own. I scheduled 14 assembly lines. And I would schedule all the materials for each one of those lines. And there would be thousands of dollars of materials I was in charge of. I knew just about every number of those rivets, and I had to order all the paint for those frames. I ordered all the glue that they use in the linings for those cases. So I loved that job. That was a good job.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. I want to take a step back just a little bit and ask about how your mother was and your siblings were when you got home, and how you met your wife.
Okay, when I got home, I met my wife the first day I got discharged. She happened to know my cousin, which knew her. And after I got discharged, that next night we took a trip to a little town called Globeville. And when we were in Globeville, there was a creamery we drove by, and my cousin happened to spot my wife in there. He said, I want you to meet this girl. She's really a neat gal. So he introduced me to her. And that's how I met my wife. Well, when I got home, I had a brother and sister, and my mother, they never did ask me much about anything about the war.
But they were well.
They were doing fine, and they were doing great. They were
That's
glad
good.
to see me.
That's good. Who stepped in to take your place on the farm?
Nobody did. We just eliminated that.
All right.
We rented 18 acres before I left the Army, and after I left, that was it.
All right. Well, it sounds like you've had a world of experiences. Young people are going into the service today, and I wonder what kind of lifelong lessons you might share with them. What kind of advice would you give to somebody going into the service, going to war?
I would tell them that they live in the finest country in the world. If they ever got called back to duty, give it your best. I recommend anybody young out of high school ought to have at least 2 years of military training. It gives them a sense of dependency. It teaches them how to live with people and how to deal with other people. I recommend that they do that. It would be real helpful for them. And try to save this country, because it's the best country in the world.
Well, I can tell you that as a school teacher, a lot of my peers and I share that same kind of value, where we think that kids should do something with themselves until they get it figured out. And instead of rambling around trying to figure it out.
That's right.
So maybe that would be a good thing. Now, how would your advice be different if you met up with somebody that was just coming back from war? Would you be able to recognize that they had seen combat?
Dan, it seems to us guys that have been in the service like that, we could pick out a guy that was in the service, and we could always pick out a guy that wasn't in the service. And if the time would come up when he mentioned something about combat, I would share his thoughts and tell him I realize what he's went through and how he feels, because I went through the same thing. But it seemed like we could almost figure out a guy that's been in the service.
Would they be able to recognize that you had been in the service?
I think they would, because of the way you dress. I don't know what it is, but I think they would.
Is it the polish and the firm stature, or what do you
It
think
would
it
be,
is?
I always shine my shoes, even today I have polished shoes. My brother, I never seen him polish his shoes once. And guys like that I would pick on. He couldn't have been in the military, I know.
All right. Well, the experiences that you've shared with us today are very, very powerful. And I just wonder if you have anything else that you might want to share with us or with young people today.
All I can tell you, Dan, I'm happy to be home and alive. I'm happy to share this experience to other people. Being in war is not fun. You don't know if you're going to live one day to the next or the next minute. It's scary, and I recommend don't go to war if you have to, but if you have to save your country, do it.
Well, I have to tell you that there's a lot of people in the writer circle and in the community that we've had help us with this project that would commend you for your service and for your loyalty to the country. It shows, and we appreciate that tremendously. And I want to tell you my own thank you for serving the country.
Dan, I want to thank you for making this possible for me.
Sure.
You've been a great experience for me. Without your leadership in doing this photo, I would not be able to do it. And I want to thank Linda and Wick Wim both for being so good and kind to me and helping me do this.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that's it.